the most pertinent issues in the Middle East, but with a particular relevance and focus on Palestine. And we try and bring you some of the guests, the best guests, who can explain to us, who can tell us their story, who can explain to us what is really happening on the ground and what we can do if we're interested to help and to get involved. And this week, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Ahmed Abu Artema. Ahmed is a Palestinian writer and he's a political activist. And he's also the author of the book Organized Chaos, as well as numerous articles. And his writings, of course, sparked the Great March of Return. We're going to be talking a lot about that to Ahmed today, but that was back in 2011, I think. We'll come back to that, but that's when Ahmed began to think about this as something that needed to happen. He's a refugee from Al Ramla village in Palestine and was born in Rafah in 1984, Rafah in Gaza. We are delighted, as I say, to be joined by Ahmed. We want to hear from you. So please do get ready to send in your questions. Tell us who you are, tell us where you are, and we're going to try and get as many of those questions in as possible. My name's Mark Seddon. I was Al Jazeera's UN correspondent for a number of years and based in New York at the United Nations. And I subsequently went on to work at the United Nations for former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and a former president of the UN General Assembly, Maria Fernanda Espinosa. Thank you, Ahmed, for joining us. As I said, we're hoping to hear from many of you, but today we are looking really at the Great March of Return and asking really if this extraordinary event has kind of reshaped Palestinian reaction to both occupation and also to resistance. So I just really wanted to begin, Ahmed, by asking something to you really about your life. Tell us, if you will, something about, how things began with you, your life as a young person in Gaza, and what it was that drew you to political activism.
Thank you very much, Mark, for having me. I'm delighted with this opportunity. Yes, I'm a Palestinian refugee, originally from Al Ramla. It's now in what's called Israel. I'm one of 7 million more refugees, Palestinian refugees. I was born in Rafah, as you introduced me. And this is when I started to understand the life. It was the first intifada, and the Israeli soldiers were in Gaza Strip here and in Rafah city. I was seeing them while they were shooting the people, and when they were throwing the tear gas. And when I was a child, I'm still remembering when I'm suffocated from the tear gas. And then when I became a youth, then it was the second intifada, the invasions, the Israeli occupation invasions. Many people were killed in my life. So all those scenes are as reminder that we are in a normal situation. We are under the occupation. We are under the violence. And Gaza is very limited place. It's about 142 square miles. And in this limited place, there are 2.2 million people. 70% of them are refugees, as me personally. So those people are deprived from their basic necessities. They don't have the freedom of movement. The majority of the people especially the generations of the youth, they never left this place. They never connected with the people from outside of Gaza Strip. So we feel how it's to be inside the prison. Gaza actually it's an open air prison. Personally, I like the nature. I like the trees. I like the walking. So one of my favorites in my life to walk far from the city. So when I was close to the fence east of Gaza Strip with my friend, I saw the Israeli soldiers on this fence. They were armed, and anyone can close to the fence, they would shoot him. In the same time, I saw the birds can move freely in the both sides of the fence. So this scene meant a lot for me. I asked myself and I asked my friend, and after that, I recorded this questions and these ideas in my Facebook profile. Why not we are like the birds? The birds decide to fly, then they can fly freely. They can arrive to that tree in the other side of the fence. Why not me as a human being to be like that bird? I want to walk in this nature. I want to arrive to that point, to that tree. So why this Israeli soldier will kill me? There is no any justification. I'm an armed man. I just want to feel that I'm human. I have my freedom to live normally. And also there is an additional reason that I'm a refugee from that village beyond the fence.
Ahmed,
So it's not another country. It's my country. I
wanted to get onto that, Ahmed. But before I do, just a couple of messages have come in. Carolyn Jose, she says, here from sunny California. Good day to everyone. Thanks for this broadcast today. It should be very interesting. Thank you. And Gemma says, hello from Lithuania. So, Ahmed, I'm sure both Gemma and Carolyn would be interested to know too. You talk there about the fact that a majority of people in Gaza are essentially refugees. And you talked also about the number of people, I think you said 7 million people that were forced to leave from Palestine and as the creation of Israel, or shortly afterwards, what is termed the Nakba in 1948. Now, people who follow these issues closely know about the Nakba, but a lot of people don't. So can you explain to us how it is that so many Palestinians have ended up refugees in their own country? And what happened in 1948?
Yeah, very important question. Yeah, I noticed that many people think that our story started in 1967. The fact that our story started in 1948. We as the Palestinian people, we were in all this land from the Mediterranean to the Jordan River. We were in our original villages and cities and towns. Then when Israel decided to build its state, this state was not on an empty land, but it was based on a land very crowded with the original people, that they are the Palestinian people. So it practiced a racial cleansing, hundreds of massacres, and Israel committed hundreds of massacres and killed tens of thousands of the people this was the cost of its basis. So we as Palestinian people, we became refugees in 1948. By the way, this is not the witness of the Palestinians like me. This is the witness of any honest historian, like as example Ilan Pappé. You know Ilan Pappé. He is an Israeli professor, but he wrote his book that racial cleansing on Palestine. So at that year, 1948, Israel, before it became Israel, it uprooted the majority of the Palestinian people from their lands. Some of them went to Gaza Strip, like my grandparents. Other part went to West Bank, other part to Jordan, to Syria, to Lebanon. So this is why the Palestinians now are in this many places in the world, and we became refugees. In 1967, Israel completed its occupation, its occupation by occupying the Gaza Strip and West Bank. But we as Palestinians, we are know that the right of return is still very deep in the Palestinian collective awareness. The majority, I visited as example Jordan, the Palestinian refugees camps in Jordan. They are still name their streets and their supermarkets that Jaffa, Jerusalem, the shop of the return as example. So it's the dream of the people. You know, until now we are 72 or 73 years far from a Nakba year. But until now, the refugees are still keeping their keys, the keys of and the papers of their homes and what became later Israel. They kept it because they thought that it's short journey, that they will still in the camps, the refugees camps, a few weeks maybe, then they will return. But a few weeks became months, then became years, then decades, now 73 decades. But they are still keeping their keys and their papers. And the first generation, when they are dying, they moved those keys to the sons, to their grandsons. This means that the Palestinians, they are still remembering their original cause, that they are refugees, and they are. But by the way, one day an Israeli journalist asked me. He asked me and say, Israel is a fact. I told him, yes, Israel is a fact, but the suffering of 7 million refugees is also a fact, and their insistence to return to their homes also this is also in fact this is also is a fact. So what can we do? We should struggle for justice for those victims.
Ahmed, if I can come in here, we're getting a couple of other messages. David says, hi from Sheffield, England. Gemma says, to start the story from 1967 is total ignorance. That's what Israel wants, to hide the crimes. But there is so much literature now, and you mentioned this, like Ilan Pappé's The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. It's inexcusable not to know the history. The point, I think, is that we've watched over the past 20, 30 years as various international statespersons have said, well, the Palestinians could easily have reached an agreement with Israel at some stage. Hello? Have we lost everybody? Hello? Can anybody hear me? I can't see or hear anybody. Well, I think you might be able to hear me. I unfortunately can't see Ahmed, and I can't hear him. So this is the problem. I think we may have lost Ahmed. I can see that our various people are getting in touch from all over the place saying they can see me, but we've lost Ahmed. Let's hope we can try and get him back. I mean, it's very interesting what he's been telling us. Connecting to audio. Ahmed.
Yeah, I'm sorry, the internet went. Now I can.
Excellent. Excellent.
Again.
So, well, glad to have you back. I thought it was my connection here in Buckingham in England, because that's usually worse here than it is in the Middle East. But anyway, you're back with us, and thank you for everybody for keeping with us. I was listening to you then, and I was thinking about, and what I was in the middle of saying was that, for a long time, the Palestinians were blamed by many people in the international community for dragging their feet over the right of return. If only they could just accept this idea that there shouldn't be an automatic right of return. There could be a permanent peace deal with Israel. But is it not the case, Ahmed, that actually, if you want to come to Israel and you can claim the right parentage or the right history, or you're Jewish, you do have a right of entry. So what do you make of all of that? You still can't, as a Palestinian, have a right of return, but if you're Jewish, you can have a right of return, even if you've never actually had a family that's lived in Israel. What do you make of all of that?
Yeah, if I understood your question precisely, yes, I don't have a problem with the Jew man as a human being. My problem was with the Israeli occupation, with the Israeli racial cleansing. So why Israel makes its existence at expense of a whole other people? So is it necessary for Israel to live normally, to live with safety, to be this on a mountain of millions of victims? This is the fact. When Israel give me all my rights, all my normal rights, my right to live normally, to return to my home, then there is no problem with the Israeli as a human to live normally. I can live with him, but as a human being, as based on equality. But the situation now, it's apartheid, it's racial discrimination. I will give you an example. Now, what if the protesters in the Great March of Return were Jews? Will Israel shoot them violently and kill them? Or maybe it will tell them, okay, welcome, we will find a room for you in our country. You have room here. So why not Israel now, if any Jew across the world decided to come here, even if he never visited Palestine before, even if his parents never came here, Israel will say to them, welcome, and will give them the Israeli nationality. By the same logic, why not Israel say for the Palestinians, they are still live without state. They are waiting their return to their homes, and they have very miserable life. Why not Israel say to us, welcome, you can went to your villages and your towns. There is no any acceptable reason but one reason, that we are non-Jews. So Israel is a racial entity. It's still making its existence at the expense of millions of victims. And I told many groups of Jews around the world that when Israel give the Palestinians their rights, this is not this will not be good only for the Palestinians. Yes, we will have our freedom, but in the same time, the Israeli new generations will free themselves from the walls of the fear and the walls of the racism. They can live normally at that time. They can live normally as human beings without fear, without racism, without walls, and we as Palestinians can live free with our human rights and with our dignity
Ahmed,
and
we
freedom.
have Stephen Watters, who I think Stephen is in Sunderland in England. He actually makes the point. He says that the right, essentially the desire or the right of return, is also, of course, enshrined in a UN resolution 194, which says that refugees wishing to return to their homes should be permitted to do so, and there should be compensation for the property or damage to property that has been happened in their absence. But you know, when you were talking there about how people could live together in Palestine if people could return to their homes, and if there could be an end to racism and apartheid and a one state solution, as I guess a secular one state democratic solution. I mean, you're talking rational common sense to a lot of people. That's rational common sense. But when you came up with this idea, because you and your friend and all of your families and friends in Gaza and other parts of the occupied territories could not cross back. You talked about the birds being able to be more free than you, to be able to fly across the borders, but you couldn't. But when you came up with this idea that really you should try and force the issue by getting people to march to the border fences, did you ever really think that the Israelis would think again and relax and negotiate and allow people to come through? Did you think that was possible?
At that moment, I didn't think anything. I just felt something relating to the freedom, and that we are as Palestinians under the suffering here in Palestine, in Gaza Strip, and in general. And we are deprived from our freedom, deprived from the medical materials, deprived from anything. So at that time, I saw and I posted, let us protest peacefully near the fence and say we want our dignified life. After I wrote that post and I suggested the hashtag Great March of Return, then the people in Gaza Strip were reacting strongly with that post, and it became a mainstream movement. It was not my personal genius, but it was because the people believe in this. The people believe in this. So it became a mainstream movement. Yes, I know that Israel will not be relaxed with the movement, but this is the problem of Israel. To me, as Palestinian, what are my choices? what are the choices I have? I don't have any choice but to say no, but to protest against the situation of the prison I live inside. So about hundreds of thousands of the Palestinians were protesting peacefully, and this was very strong message that these people are struggling for their dignity and for their freedom. Unfortunately, Israel is still ignore this fact that there is a Palestinian people, there is a people struggle for their freedom. Israel is still treating with the Palestinian people as the United States administration treat with the native people in America. It say that there is no Palestinian people. So it was very strong message from us as Palestinian people that we are here in our land and we are still struggling. Yes, we have 70 years from the suffering, from the struggle, from the victims, but we don't have other choice but to continue. So I think when Israel used the lethal violence against the unarmed protesters, I think this is was a condemnation for the formal world system. Israel felt impunity. It felt that it can do anything and no one will account it. So this is what encourages Israel to kill us and to use the lethal violence.
Ahmed, we could all see on our television screens film footage shot of Israeli IDF soldiers firing at unarmed demonstrators, live rounds, and we could see gas canisters being fired at essentially people in their desperation who were demonstrating. And even if some were trying to march on a fence, there was no way that that they could harm anybody on the other side of the fence. And in fact, I think maybe there was one Israeli soldier that might have been injured, and amidst all the carnage of that time. There's a question here from Alex Bustos. He says, "Hi Ahmed, it's great to hear from you today. Could you speak about Western?" Yeah, thank you. Could you speak about the Western media's representation of the Great March of Return, and how
about what again, please?
What do you think about the Western media's representation or reporting of the Great March, and how, for example, the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, presented the protests and Israel's violent response to them? What do you think of did you see much of the Western media coverage, and what did you think of it?
Yeah, I don't feel satisfied towards the mainstream media in the West, in the United States and West. Yes, there are very great media outlets that it showed the facts, the reality of what's happening here in Palestine. But unfortunately, the mainstream media is still biased toward Israel and towards the Israeli narrative. He mentioned the BBC, especially. I had a problem with the BBC coverage with the Great March of Return, because they showed that as the Palestinian barbaric protesters will attack the Jews and will and in the same time, the other side, there are very quiet people. They live their life normally, but unfortunately, they are under terrorism. This was the BBC coverage. And I told them at that time, and I wrote an article about BBC coverage, that you killed us again. You killed us again. Why you ignore the root of the problem? Why those people, millions, 200,000 of the people were protesting in Gaza Strip near the fence? Why? This is because they they are feeling deeply the suffering, and they should protest and they should demand their freedom. So our message to the media, that we don't want from you too much. We only want from you to show the fact for the world, not half fact, but the whole fact, the big picture, the root of the problem. What's the root of this? Don't say, as example, they many times said that the violence, the conflicts. It's not violence. It's not conflict. It's there are a Palestinian people. They are facing the occupation, and they are facing the racial discrimination and the racial cleansing. This is the fact, and this is the starting point.
Well, Ahmed, I think that the facts kind of speak for themselves, and this is quite separate to any issue about rockets being fired into Israel and the response or the provocations from whichever side. The reality of the Great March of Return was that tens of thousands protested over 18 months. I think the original intention was for one big protest, but it stayed for 18 months. The International Red Cross, I think they talk about 13,000 Palestinians being wounded and injured, and some 110 Palestinians actually killed. It's incredibly one-sided. And I think whatever the media coverage may have been, a lot of people could see that, but they could see what was going on. But at the same time, they weren't getting the analysis and the fairness that they were expecting. Gary here, he says, do you think the Great March of Return was a success? Did it bring international attention to the 14-year-old siege Gaza? And do you think the world woke up to the realities of the brutal siege of Gaza? Or did the world just, look at what happened and turn away and, oh, well, let's move on to the next issue? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the Great March of Return was necessary step or episode in the long series of the Palestinian struggle for their freedom. Before the Great March of Return, there was the Intifada, the first Intifada, the second Intifada. Before that, there were battles between the Palestinians and the Israeli occupation. So I think, if I want to make an assessment for the Great March of Return, I can say that we should do this and we should not do that. This is okay to be critical assessment, but finally, as a people under the occupation and struggle for their freedom, we should have this movement in our history, because we are under pressure, we are deprived from everything, and we should struggle to show our message that we are still here and that we are struggling for our freedom. Yes, I want to return a bit for the comparison between the Palestinian victims in the Great March of Return and the Israeli victims. Actually, there was 0 Israeli victims in the Great March of Return. I think maybe there is 1 or 2 Israeli soldiers were injured. I'm not sure. But what if we comparison this with the thousands of the Palestinians were killed and injured in the Great March of Return? Yes, the facts can tell the people about itself, but unfortunately, the people can don't care about the facts and about this. They are only say the image, and when the coverage take a part of the fact and focus on and ignore the hundreds or the thousands of the Palestinian victims, at that moment, the picture will not arrive correctly to the people. So we need not only few work to convey our message. We want many and too much work to convey our message for the world.
It's very interesting there. You're talking about history and the importance of this 18-month campaign, 18 months of people protesting for the right of return, this great movement of return. And as you were mentioning that, I was thinking about two historical civil rights disobedience marches that turned violent with many innocent people being killed in British history, in Derry, Bloody Sunday, in the late 60s, Amritsar in India, when General Dyer ordered the British troops to fire upon protesters. For all of the failings of the system afterwards, there were at least inquiries. These events have been etched into the history of these islands and, of course, India. When it comes to the Great March of Return, we saw the UN General Assembly, as you know, condemning the disproportionate use of force. I think the General Assembly, they said that, what did they say? They said, well, they were very clear that the use of deadly force should not have been allowed. I mean, live ammunition being fired at unarmed demonstrators across a fence is against international law. And of course, what we know now is the International Criminal Court is investigating Israel for alleged war crimes. So what do you think about that, the investigation and the fact that the British government, for instance, has condemned the idea of having an investigation? And of course, the United States refuses even, like Israel and one or two other countries, to even recognize the International Criminal Court. But what do you think of that?
Yeah, yes. Again, please, the last part of the question, please.
Well, it's the investigation into alleged Israeli war crimes by the ICC, the International Criminal Court. The fact that the British government has said there shouldn't be an investigation, and the fact that the United States doesn't even accept that there should be an International Criminal Court. It won't even become a member. How do you get justice when two major permanent members of the UN Security Council won't even agree to disagree with even having an investigation?
Yeah, we feel disappointed toward this unjust world that is still biased with Israel and ignore the victims. And we believe that this is a major reason for the continuation of our suffering as Palestinians. That the problem is not only with Israel. The problem is with the international community that support Israel politically and support Israel with all the ways. But as I mentioned before, we don't have any choice but to continue. Yes, we know that there are many supporters of the Israeli violence, of the Israeli colonialism, but in the same time, we believe that there are many of the people who believe in freedom around the world, who believe in dignity around the world. And those people, those people are in one front. We all struggle together for our freedom, and for actually not only for our freedom as Palestinians, but for the freedom of everyone around the world, and to make a world without occupation, without walls. So this what give us the hope in the future. Yes, the United States government, the European governments are still support Israel, but in the same time, we think that the peoples are stronger than the governments, and the peoples who believe in freedom and who believe in justice and who believe in a world without apartheid, without occupation. This world, we belong to this world, and we will still to struggle together with those free people until we achieve our freedom, inshallah.
Ahmed, Stephen Waters makes a point here. He says, and this is from IsraelPalestineNews.org. In total, and this is collateral. This is what they might call collateral damage, or people being injured or killed who weren't Palestinians. He says that in just 2 months between 2018, from 30th March through to 30th of May, there were 46 injuries to journalists in Gaza from live Israeli ammunition or explosive bullets. So these are journalists being injured who are actually covering what is going on. Jane, I'm not quite sure where Jane is from, but she asks, what hope do young people have in Gaza of freedom when young paramedics like 21-year-old Razan al-Najjar attending the wounds of the injured and photojournalist Yasser Mataja are targeted and shot dead in cold blood? How can there be any hope? I hear suicide rates in Gaza are very high among the youth.
Yeah, Razan al-Najjar and Yasser Mortaja, they are victims of the Israeli occupation. And this is they are examples, just 2 examples from tens of thousands of examples how Israel is very criminal and how it commit war crimes. But the people here in Gaza, they are deprived from their freedom. Yasser Mortaja, as example, his dream was to travel. It's very simple dream, and he posted in his Facebook profile before a few days before he was killed that his dream is to travel and to see the world. But as I mentioned again, in other words, we as Palestinians, we struggle because we have the hope, because we don't want to surrender, to give up for this reality, the reality of disappointment, the reality of the Israeli occupation. So when Razan, as example, when Razan went to help the people, the injured people, and she was a volunteer while she was only 21 years old. Why she did that? She did that because she deeply believed in her freedom, and she believed that we should create a better reality. This is the inspiration of Razan and Yasser and the hundreds of the people they were killed for their freedom. They were struggling not because they don't like the life, but because they want their dignified life, but because they were seeking for their dignified life and their freedom.
Thank you, Ahmed. There's a point here. This is from Gemma. She says about the right of return. Maybe people already know this from Dr. Salman Abu Sitta's presentations at webinars, but I would like to remind everybody about his work on the feasibility of return. As a cartographer, an engineer, and a refugee, he proves that there is plenty of space for returning and for living together. Out of 560 depopulated villages, only 93 village sites have been built up, but the Beersheba district is practically empty. And she says you can go and look at his speech at the speech he gave at the Edward Said Memorial Lecture in Australia. But I was thinking about that space and division and people being forced out, people not being able to return. And the theme that has run all the way through our conversation, Ahmed, and that of apartheid, similarities between the policies of South Africa, and also you mentioned the policies of the US administration with the Native Americans. But I'm wondering, is it possible that the situation in Israel-Palestine is worse than apartheid South Africa? And the reason I ask you this question is the South African regime, apartheid regime, wanted Black South Africans because it needed their labor. But Israel maybe doesn't want the Palestinians at all. And whilst there are still some Palestinians working inside Israel, the Israeli authorities would probably like the Palestinians to go away altogether and to drive them all out for good. So does that, I suppose my question is, does that make the situation worse in Israel, Palestine, than it was in South Africa under apartheid?
Yeah, sure. The situation in Palestine is worse than South Africa because Israel, in South Africa, yeah, there was racial discrimination. But here there is racial discrimination, and also there are refugees, millions of refugees. Israel has problem with our existence as Palestinians. So we have very hard struggle and very hard battle with the Israeli occupation and with the Israeli colonialism. But we don't have other choices. Our only choice to challenge, to resist, to say no. So this is why, imagine that the people, as example, in Jerusalem, the Palestinian people in Jerusalem, only their existence there is resistance, even if they didn't do anything, because Israel tried to uproot them, to kick them out from their homes. So yes, we have double battle, not only to break the racial discrimination, but before that to stay here in our land and to prevent the Israeli project to kick us out from our land.
Of course, Ahmed, the reality of the situation is that, from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean, there's almost parity. Perhaps Palestinians may even outnumber Israelis. So really, it would make a great deal of sense for everybody if people in Israel could see sense. A lot of the Israelis who have been supporting the Likud and what have you in the occupations, they could see sense and they could realize that actually only by reaching an agreement and to move towards a secular state solution can there finally be peace. But I'm interested because also I think you've got news to tell us, because the Palestinian elections are up and coming, we believe. I mean, there is some debate as to what's going to happen in East Jerusalem. You can tell us more about that. You can tell us if the elections are going to happen on time. But of great interest to all of us is the fact that you're going to be a candidate as well. So tell us a bit about the Palestinian elections. Tell us about your candidature and what you hope to do if elected. And during your campaign, what will your campaign be about?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not sure if the elections will go ahead or not, because there are many complications here. And one of these complications that Israel is still disagree the elections inside the Jerusalem. So I'm not sure if it will go ahead or not. The Palestinian elections is a step for the Palestinians themselves to organize themselves and to elect new people to represent them. To me, I participated in these elections. That I have ambition to have my role to help my people here in the society. There are many problems here relating to the first of all the political problem, and this is very complicated. And also there are the problems of the poverty, unemployment. Also, how can we make conditions for the people to release their hard situation that they live. So I try to make something. I know, yes, it's very hard, very long. So I say for the people, I don't promise you big goals. But I promise you, to be honest with you, I promise you to adopt your dreams and what you think. The campaign didn't start yet. It's supposed to start 9 days later. But as I mentioned you, I'm still, and the Palestinians in general are not sure that the elections will go ahead.
Well, Ahmed, if I might come back to you on that, because can you explain to us the situation in East Jerusalem? Is it because Israel is saying that people in East Jerusalem may not be able to vote? And the other question is, as a Palestinian standing in the election, people don't often realize that you can't go, if you're in Gaza, to the West Bank, and you can't go if you're campaigning from the West Bank to East Jerusalem or from the West Bank to Gaza in these cantons, these Bantustan, if you like, these apartheid era constructs. So how do you have a proper election if the Israelis are telling you who can vote and where you can actually canvass or campaign? It makes no sense.
Exactly. It's very hard situation. And first, I never visited Jerusalem. I never visited West Bank. And I think you from London, it's easier to you to visit Jerusalem than me. This is not me personally only. The majority of the people, my generation and younger, the majority of them, they never visited. They visited the West Bank. Also, the people in West Bank, they never visited Gaza Strip. So our only way to connect and to still remember that we are one people is on the technology and Facebook and something like this. I cannot arrive to West Bank or Jerusalem. So when the campaign will start, our only way that the advertised posts and videos toward the people on we try by helping the technology to keep our unity as one people in Palestine, but there is Israel imposed a separation between us. So yes, it's very complicated situation. I even cannot imagine, despite I'm Palestinian, I even cannot imagine how is the situation, the details of the situation in Jerusalem, as example. But what my knowledge is from the news, not personal knowledge. So I know that Israel is still control our decisions as Palestinians. How can we practice our rights? How can we move everything? So this reminds us of that the original problem, that we are a people under the occupation and we are still fighting for our freedom, and we will never we cannot live normal life without ending this occupation and without getting our freedom.
Ahmed, Roger Waters has got in touch with us, and he says, hi, Ahmed, I was just thinking about Razan al-Nadir when Gemma called in. I'm listening intently. You bring up the ICC, the International Criminal Court, the Statute of Rome, the UN, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We, the people, believe in these things. Our governments don't. So all we can do is pursue these laudable ends. We must shame them into compliance, destroy the walls of their primal disdain for others with our love for our brothers and sisters. And as Roger was writing that, I was also thinking about a guest we had on recently, Loe Obasani. We were talking about him before we came on, Ahmed. He's the Palestinian lead engineer on the NASA space program, the helicopter, which took off yesterday. I think it was yesterday or the day before, and made the first unmanned flight on Martian on Mars, in the thin air of Mars, not air, but you know what I mean. And he was a most remarkable man like you. And he was telling us, and he subsequently went on mainstream British television, he was telling us how difficult it was as a Palestinian to actually return home, and how difficult it was to leave Gaza. He's from Gaza too. And his story was a dramatic one, and brought home to a lot of people in this country, I think, just how difficult it is. And despite all these UN declarations, as Roger was saying, and all of the international law and the General Assembly resolutions and all the rest of it, how these basic rights are denied. And so, you know, we wish you the very, very best for your election, Ahmed. And unfortunately, we are running out of time. So I'm just going to ask you one final question, I think, on reflection.
Yeah.
As we've been talking about the Great March of Return today. This was a time when Palestinians decided we're going to try peacefully to get our rights. And they were met by a hail of fire. What next for the Palestinian people? How next to mobilize? How next to get the rights that we all want people in Palestine to have?
Yeah, the Palestinians are very tired because of they are deprived from their basic necessities. Now the situation here is very horrible. Imagine that hundreds of thousands of the youth in Gaza, they, as example, they don't have their opportunity in this life to work or to have home, or to get married, or even to travel. They don't have any opportunity. They are living. It's strange that they are still live in this situation. So the people are still are very tired, and this is sure because of the Israeli occupation. Israel is still control Gaza Strip, and it still control everything can enter or leave Gaza Strip. So yes, this make us aware that how the occupation is very horrible and how it's very necessary that this occupation will be ended. Despite of what are the details what the people can do here after the Great of March of Return, but the people sure will have more waves in the future, in the soon future, to rebel, to express themselves, to say for the Israeli occupation that we are here and we want our dignified life. The Great March of Return was a shout, was a scream. It was an expression of how it's strong the will of the life inside the Palestinian people, because it was an alternative of the despair, of the death. The people here without their basic necessities, they are actually dying, but they decided at that moment that we want to scream, we want to shout, we want to knock the door of this prison and to say we want our freedom. Yes, now the Great March of Return was ended, but I'm sure that the Palestinians will find more and more ways to send their message that they are in this way, and they will never give up until they get their freedom and their dignity.
Well, Ahmed, I mean, we're all here to try and help in whichever way we can, to be of assistance. And I think it's very important. What we try to do at Palestine Deep Dive is actually try and report what's really happening and get behind the headlines, to do this deep dive, to report on what's happening in Palestine. And so, you know, if, by the way, for people all around the world who have tuned in here today to our talk with Ahmed, If you don't subscribe, please do. We've got the web link there up in the chat. There's a daily newsletter, a morning newsletter that comes. Our dedicated team of journalists and researchers put together the news from around the world that focuses on Palestine. So please subscribe to us and support us because you're also supporting Ahmed and what he's doing and what others are doing. Roger Waters says again, well said, Ahmed. More power to your elbow. He also says ban Israel from FIFA and UEFA. Well, there you are. There's a campaign that needs to be launched, perhaps. And by the way, we talked also. This is a brief summing up because sadly we have to come to an end. As you can see here, I'm being enveloped by the darkness. Ahmed, night is beginning to fall, and I forgot to switch the lights on. But for people who want also to look at that interview we did recently with Loya Al-Bassouni, the NASA chief engineer on the space program, the helicopter program. We have it here at Palestine Deep Dive. Do look at it. Also, Jon Snow, Channel 4 News interviewed him, and if you go to the Channel 4 News website, you can see it. Well, look, yes, Salman Abu Sitta says, remedy resistance for Palestinians, spreading truth to the West, cut down Zionist influence. Well, look, we've had a lot of you getting in touch today. Thank you very much for your questions. But thank you to Ahmed, our special guest. Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. I'm very delighted of this opportunity, and thanks for my friends who asked their questions. I'm sorry, sometimes my English doesn't help me to be more effective with the questions, so please forgive me for this. But I'm very delighted to see this interview, to share, to participate in this interview, and to listen to your questions. And I hope that we have more opportunities in the future to stay in connection, inshallah.
Well, we'd love that, Ahmed. We'd love you to come back. We wish you well in the elections. We hope that they take place. Good luck, Ahmed. You've been a fantastic guest, and it just really leaves it to me to thank our team, to Omar, to Kieran, to Alex, to Mac, to everybody at Palestine Deep Dive. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Ahmed again. And until next time, we'll see you then. Take care. Bye-bye.